And I said, you know what I'm going to do? And I got totally carried away by myself. And I was like, the next time they knock at my door with my food, I'm going to strip naked, I'm going to cover myself in baby oil, and I am going to run down the 14th floor, and I'm going to grab the security guy by his head, and I'm going to drag him to my apartment, and I'm going to do terrible things to him.
Okay, welcome back to my channel. Today, as you can see, we have Katie Hopkins, a woman for whom I have the utmost admiration. She's been in the trenches fighting the good fight for many years now and has suffered greatly for her pains. But as we'll see in this interview, this is quite a long interview with Marissa from PragerU. She's very optimistic about the future, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that Elon Musk let her back on X, along with several other deplorables and unmentionables, and also with Donald Trump's election and the start of a second term, which is like been a firestorm of activity. So she's in this part of the interview, she's talking about how she was banned from Australia. By the way, I'm doing a couple other videos taken from this interview, kind of splitting it up so it doesn't get too long. And she's talking about, how she was banned from Australia. She was in Australia. She arrived during COVID, was put in like a 14-day quarantine. She'll tell us all about it, but it is kind of amusing and but kind of sad at the same time, just to see how utterly cucked Australia has become, much like the UK. I mean, I don't know which one's worse. Every country in the Western world has its problems these days. We're not going to lie. We're not like, it's not a race to see who's going down the drain fastest, but it sounds like Australia's in a bad way. Anyway, let's see what Katie Hopkins has to say.
Why are you banned from Australia?
So there's a weird thing. I'm just me. I started off in the military, and I went through the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst, and I came out of there an Army officer in the Intelligence Corps. I signed up for 35 years. I didn't get to do all of that because I was also epileptic, but I was always going to be military. Then I ended up working in the media, becoming kind of known, this kind of known thing. Then I ended up being the enemy, right? The monster, the woman you must disregard, you must spit at her because she says things that are clearly bad. And now I'm getting to be able to speak again. But as part of being known, I suppose, I've done some shows like Celebrity Big Brother. It's a ridiculous show where celebrities, what are they, live in a house together and have arguments.
Yeah.
So I was invited to do that in Australia. But I was invited to do that in Australia during lockdown, when Australians were locked down and brutalized and punished and not allowed to return to their children and not allowed to visit their dying relatives and not allowed to be with their mother in their last hours. And I was brought into that country to do a TV show at that time. And I said yes, because I knew very well that I was going to use it in some way. So I got taken to my quarantine cell. I had to stay there for 14 days on my own, not allowed to have a key, not allowed to answer the door, not allowed to go for food, not allowed to get out of that room.
Well, you were not sick.
No, quarantine because of COVID, and COVID would know.
Yeah.
Like if I answered my own door, COVID would know. Sure. So I had to wait at my door for my food to be delivered to go on a stupid TV show. And I wasn't allowed to tell anyone I was there, and I got escorted there by the military, and I wasn't allowed to breathe. And so one day during quarantine, my husband said to me, my husband calls me Little Birdie, and he goes, Little Birdie, I don't think you're going to be very good at this, like being on my own. And you could see how me being alone with myself isn't very good, because I'm pretty intolerable.
Quarantining you for 2 weeks in a room.
In a country and a lockdown that I don't believe in, that I think is cruel. So one day I went live on YouTube from my quarantine. And I said, I have been brought here for a ridiculous TV program when you are being locked down, held captive by your politicians. And I was encouraging Australians to rise up, to fight back, to take to the streets, to come and find me. And then I looked across at the cooker and there was some vegetable oil. And I said, you know what I'm going to do? And I got totally carried away by myself. And I was like, the next time they knock at my door with my food, I'm going to strip naked, I'm going to cover myself in baby oil, and I am going to run down the 14th floor, and I'm going to grab the security guy by his head, and I'm going to drag him to my apartment, and I'm going to do terrible things to him, right? Totally carried away. And then Al Jazeera and BBC
They were waiting.
and Guardian and Fox, they all said it was real. Hopkins violates military on 14th floor. It became a real thing that I'd escaped quarantine, I'd gone rogue, and I'd violated people.
What?
I've never actually heard that story, and I've been following Katie Hopkins for many years now, but I didn't realize she did that during quarantine, and that her silly U2 Live was taken seriously by the very serious government of Australia. If anyone knows more about this, please let me know in the comments. I'd really like to hear about it.
Oil.
Oh my God. It was national news. It was breakfast TV in Australia. The Prime Minister was out telling me I had to get out of the country.
Did
My
they
fees-
forget that you're a comedian?
They forgot their souls, is what they forgot when they locked down an entire people for no reason whatsoever. And so my visa was cancelled, and within 2 days, I was on a plane, marched on the plane, and deported out of that country.
Forever.
Yeah, I'm banned for 4 years. But actually, all of lovely Mark's relatives live in Australia, so I don't have to visit them.
There's always a silver lining. What happened in South Africa?
So South Africa, many years ago, South Africans I would hear their stories. You know, white South African farmers are being
Yes.
hunted from their land by black gangs. Fact. And I had a young son at the time, and he would sometimes have nightmares about when the monsters would come, you know, at nighttime. But in South Africa, that is when the gangs come. And they work together and they attack white farmers. And some of the things that happen to white farmers, we don't need to talk about here, but the barbarity, it isn't just about burglary, which it gets filed away as. This is torture of a people. And so I went over to South Africa and I wanted to sleep on white farms with white farmers and make the world talk about what was happening.
When was this?
This was probably about 6, 7 years ago now, I want to say.
while.
A while ago, because I knew what was happening and the world won't talk about it. And the numbers of white farmers being killed is incredible. And because South Africans have expropriation without compensation, which basically means we're taking your land. Mm-hmm. So I went and slept on the farms to feel the fear and to show. And still, you know, it was hard to get the word out because I was seen as being racist Hopkins, you know, the monster. But eventually I went to leave the country, and then the ANC, who knew I was in country, they fiddled with my passport. I got detained at the airport. The security team had their weapons drawn in the parking lot in case I was taken away. And I'm banned from South Africa as well. So I'm banned from South Africa, banned from Australia, banned from schools in Wales. No particular reason.
As in you can't walk in and give a speech there?
No. Children in Wales asked me to come and do a tour, but the Welsh government said that any school that hosted me would lose their funding. So I'm banned from schools in Wales.
I can't imagine. I'm thinking about your experience at the airport in South Africa.
Oh,
it
my
sounds
gosh.
incredibly scary.
Yeah, there was a moment there. I handed my passport over and I heard the beep and I knew, and then I saw the guy look at the thing and then he took my passport, and that was the minute I thought, you know, there's been a number of moments in my life, I guess, where I thought that was time up, but certainly I thought that was time up because a white woman doesn't get taken into custody in South Africa and come out again. White people are denied treatment in hospitals in South Africa. You know, it's an extreme situation that no one will talk about. And my very big hope now is that now I've been redeemed somehow by the amazing power of people, is that perhaps more people will look at some of this stuff now and see that I was just trying to show. So that's also a really hopeful thing. And South Africans will always know that I have their whole hearts and I won't stop fighting for them. And we know, as in my country, it's always food security, water security, you know, and energy security. That's what they come for.
I'm glad she talked about South Africa because, yeah, I think most of us in Western Europe and America and wherever, the West in general, don't really know much about South Africa. I know personally, as I was growing up, I was born and raised in the United States, as I've said on many occasions, and I've lived in Europe for many decades now. We have a very superficial, extremely superficial knowledge of South Africa. And of course, I was raised by my family, who are inveterate liberals and Democrats and progressives. to see South Africa, back then apartheid was still, when I was a kid, apartheid was still underway. I remember when Mandela was released from jail and stuff. But it's been reviled, internationally. It was an international pariah. But the facts about South Africa are completely unknown. I was completely unaware of them. And I've talked to a fair number of South Africans over the years. I even shared a house with a couple when I was at university in England back in the late 80s. And yeah, it's interesting how I had zero idea of how actually South Africa was settled, who was living there when it was settled, who built up the country, how it became the Republic of South Africa, all these things. And it's worth looking into because it's not what we've been told. And this idea that the white minority was oppressing, the much bigger black majority, is nonsense. Yes, it was segregated, of course, because the white settlers, the European settlers, the Afrikaners, they built a country there, and then the English came at some point. I don't claim to know a lot about South African history, but like the only people living there were the equivalent of the indigenous people were, what do they call them? We used to call them the Bushmen and the Hottentots. What's the correct term these days? The Khoisan, I believe. The tribes of the little guys who live very close to nature. They were the ones who were there, sort of sparsely, they were the ones living there. All the blacks in South Africa now, apart from the Khoisan, they are also immigrants. They came after the Europeans built up something, built up a country, basically. And they came to work. And yes, they weren't slaves. They weren't, brought over from another place to be slaves. But they came looking for work, I guess. And yes, South Africa had segregation. That's what apartheid means. It is literally the Afrikaans word for segregation. Same as the Dutch word. Dutch is spoken where I live, so I recognize the word immediately. And yeah, they had it. And so what? Because, frankly, South Africa, obviously, South Africa, the apartheid system ended and majority rule was established in 1994 now? It's been 30 years. And South Africa has gone down the shitter since then. It is in a bad way now. And I would say probably now, if there are any South Africans listening to this, please give some comments or leave some useful links. But I do follow some South Africans in various locations, and I do follow. I'm very interested in the progress of Oranje, the whites only township, I guess it's called, or town, which has been established in South Africa, and which, if you look up Oranje and on The Guardian. There was an article published in The Guardian about 10 years ago, where, of course, every article published in the Western media about Oranje, derides it for being the whites-only town, a holdout of racism and all that. In fact, what it looks like, it looks pretty damn nice. And I've been keeping an eye on them over the last, probably 8-10 years. And they're going from strength to strength, just slowly building. But yeah, there's going to be a big problem in South Africa at some point. There's got to be some kind of reckoning, because that country is falling apart. Perhaps not as quickly as Zimbabwe or Rhodesia fell apart after all the Europeans were kicked out, but it's happening. So I'm glad she mentioned that. I would like to see more about what Katie Hopkins did in South Africa, but I would personally love to go to South Africa. I think it'd be very, very interesting. But yeah, there is a lot of work to do in the Western world, and I guess one of the important things one of the biggest lessons we can learn from, say, South Africa and the United States is, do your own work. Like in the U.S., pick your own cotton. In South Africa, do your own work. For whatever reason, they imported all these people, all these alien people to the country they created, to do the low-level work. To work in the fields or whatever they did, or to work in homes, as domestics and all that. It wasn't worth it. It's just not worth it. Same in the United States, it wasn't worth it bringing over people from another continent who don't belong there. You know, it wasn't good for them, and it wasn't good for the people who brought them over. It's just do your own work. Yeah. Anyway, let me know what you think about this. I'm glad to see Katie Hopkins looking so optimistic. It's good. We all need to, you know, to remain optimistic, to keep up hope, never to give in to despair, and to thank God that for the creation around us, and that He has given us another day on this earth. So I will leave it. I'll leave it off there. Let me know what you think in the comments. Like and subscribe. Really helps me grow the channel and continue making content for you. And I will see you in the next video.